Terminal window is still open, and we can hide it by pressing Ctrl and backtick again. Okay? Now we can open up the Files and Folders panel by pressing Command and B on Mac or Ctrl B on Windows. So let's quickly explore what we have in this project. This client app folder is where we have the client-side code, the Angular app. So we have this app folder, we have our app module, we have our components, exactly like other Angular applications. We also have controllers and views which belong to ASP.NET Core, exactly like ASP.NET MVC5. We have a new folder, root, and this is where we put the public assets of our application for the client side. So here we have the icon for our application. We also have this dist or distributable folder. And inside this folder, we have a couple of JavaScript files. One is main-client, and this is the compilation of our Angular application into JavaScript. We also have vendor.js, which is the compilation of all the third-party libraries here. And similarly, we have vendor.css, which is the compilation of all third-party style sheets in this project. So in your applications, you need to put the public assets inside this root folder. That includes any images, fonts, icons, and so on. Now, this is different from the previous version of ASP.NET. So in ASP.NET MVC5, the project root was considered the root of the web application. And then if we wanted to exclude some folders, we had to blacklist them. Now in ASP.NET Core, Microsoft took a different approach. So the project root is blacklisted, and this root folder is whitelisted. With this structure, the chances of something private being accidentally exposed to the outside is reduced. Okay, let's see what else we have here. We have this app settings.json. So in ASP.NET Core, this is where we store our application settings. In the previous version, we use web.config for that. And also here we have a hierarchy. So you can see we have multiple levels here. We have logging. Under that, we have log level. And under that, we have these three key value pairs. In web.config, we didn't have this hierarchy. So we had a bunch of key value pairs under app settings. And if you wanted to create a hierarchy, it was a little bit complicated. But in ASP.NET Core, this is inherently supported and it's really easy to access these settings, as I will show you later in the course. Now we have a couple of new files here, program and startup, and this is where our application starts. There's more detail involved, so I'm going to talk about that in the next lecture. So let's move on. Here we have our CS_proj file, and this is a project file that Visual Studio recognizes. So if you don't want to use VS Code, you can open this project in Visual Studio 2017. Next is our web.config, and you can see it's really simplified. There is nothing happening here. We only have system.webserver, which is for configuration of IIS, and nothing else. And finally, we have a couple of Webpack configuration files. So Webpack, if you have worked with Angular CLI, you should be familiar with that. It's a bundler for client-side code. So it can compile and minify all our JavaScript and style sheet files. Now in this code, we are basically telling Webpack where our source files are, how they should be processed, and where they should be stored. For example, here we have a property called public path, which is set to our dist folder. So with this configuration, when Webpack bundles our client-side code, it will store it inside this folder, as I showed you earlier, which is under root. Now, for the most part, you don't need to modify this Webpack configuration file, but sometimes in some projects, you may need to modify this configuration. That's beyond the scope of this course. You need to look at Webpack documentation. And finally, we have one more Webpack file, which is webpack.config.vendor.js. So in this file, we have the configuration for compiling all the third-party libraries. So let's have a quick look here. If you scroll down, under entry, vendor, here you can see all the third-party libraries. So we've got Angular, Bootstrap, and so on. So in the future, when we want to add the third-party library, we're going to come back and add it to this file. So this is the basic project structure. In the next lecture, I'm going to talk about application startup.